Okay. You are live and recording is on.
The recording's on?
Yep.
Cool. Jim, are you ready or?
No, the login button is just not working.
All right, I'll let you log in while I introduce, because I have to stand here while I'm introducing, right?
Yes, please.
Okay. I always forget where to stand when introducing the session. But this is it Engaging the Disengaged Student this semester?
I think so.
We had to change the title of it this semester. But I'm Hunter Stuckemeyer. This is Jim Ellison, Early Childhood Ed, Psychology. And real quick, just because I know some of your faces, I know some of your names, and I know we're not a large group, but at the same time, I don't know all of you. So if you want to just give a quick introduction, share anything you want to share, I'm not going to pressure anyone today. Usually I'm like, share something like this, but I'm not feeling like pressuring people today. So, Calvin, do you want to start?
Oh, yes, Calvin Washington II, teaching the business department.
Hello, Yanni. I teach PE and college readiness.
Ooh, I didn't know, like, so what does PE entail here?
Physical education.
Yeah, so like, is it like with like K through 12, or is it like something different here?
No, I teach credit courses for people that want to become physical education instructors and personal trainers.
That's cool. I didn't know we had that here. Sorry, you're teaching me something new about our college, and I'm very excited about it. All right, moving on.
Hi, I'm Hillary Meyer, Dean of Academic Success. That includes our Access and Accommodations Department, our library, our tutoring center, our TRIO SSS, Early Alert. And I'm here primarily because part of our strategic plan includes a focus on neurodiversity, and so I'm very excited that Jim and Hunter are putting this on. So I'm hoping to learn a lot.
I hope so too.
I'm Dominique Dial. I'm the director of CAS.
Oh, perfect. So now we get to sweat a bit and be like,
I'm hoping you're going to teach me something.
perfect. Well, welcome. How you doing?
Oh, for some reason, we're blocked from signing on here. I have run into that in particular systems. We can just talk about it.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you all know why we're here. Like you all saw the description for the session, which is talking about ways in which ADHD students struggle in the classroom, because there's something in our brains that is just not the typical thing happening. We're not going to touch on autism today or anything else with neurodiversity, but just ADHD. So I want you to like think of a time when like a student was just not there. You probably have several, but just like it would give you a few seconds just to think back and be like, ooh, that student just could not like stop doing this. Was like leaving in and out of the room the whole class. So I'll give you a few seconds to think about that.
Hard to narrow it down.
Do you have one example you want to share? What they're thinking?
I've got a student who seems like she's never quite there. She stares into space, and then, but all of a sudden it seems like she's listening. And when we are directly engaged, she has interesting things to say and she's insightful. But then it's like she's gone again. I can't, in the midst of all class, I can't figure out what's going on there. But also after my dean visited, she was leaving and she's walking next to the dean and she was observing and she turns to Jeanette and she points back in there and goes, he's a keeper. So now I'm wondering, what is she exactly paying attention to? She's one where I feel like her brain chemistry is, I don't know.
Yeah. I won't share the name of the student, but there was a student who I did have my first semester at Triton who he would just leave in the middle of class every day for like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, just leave. And our syllabi, one of the syllabi I inherited at Triton said like students should not leave in the middle of class because it's disruptive. So my first thing was like, ooh, like what do I do about this? Because clearly in the syllabus it says that you're not supposed to leave. Class is only an hour, 15 minutes. Like I get sometimes you have to go to the bathroom or something. but like what's happening there? And that's where like kind of like I started wondering like, okay. And he did share with me in a later conversation that he had ADHD, and that was the reason for it, which, you know, you're not always going to get that information, but that distraction for him and for everyone else as he's coming in and out of the classroom is really high. Any examples you guys want to share or can think of that you're like, oh, this was clearly their attention was not here. They were leaving, falling asleep.
Do you think there's, no, go ahead.
So I know in CAS, because we have accommodated testing, we've had students literally pacing our testing room or like walk into our space, turn around and go back, and they do it like every 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah.
While they're taking a test?
Yeah. So we're watching them do this.
Interesting.
And it's just every time this one student takes a test, that's how he focuses. That's how he does it.
So that's just, so like, is that a way, I'm trying to figure out how to ask this question. I don't want to say manage it, but like, how do you guys like frame that for people who might not know or like teach your staff about that?
So in our office, because we work with the testing center, we decided as a staff that this student, anytime he has an accommodated test, he'll be in our space. So myself or the coordinator will be there. So if there is a problem, because we are now aware of how he tries to manage it. So, and then we've told the other staff, like, don't worry, it's fine. Do not approach him. Just let him do his thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if they say, like, I've got a person where it says they're entitled to have a test read aloud, do you actually do that, read them aloud to them, or?
We use software, so it's not a human reader. So yeah, so they can pause it, turn it off, change the
Okay,
voice.
okay.
Yeah.
I'd be too distracted by voices. I'd be sitting there picking like between six voices for every question.
Right.
I don't know how many you have, but like that'd be, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Any other time where like someone was distracted and just kind of like,
See, it's hard for me to tell. I had a student just leave in the middle of class. Well, as soon as we had an exam, he left and just sat in the hallway. But then when I was talking to him, it seemed like what it was is he was just completely stressed out in his life, and I don't know if it's just test taking that brought him to that point. So I don't want to just be busy diagnosing.
well, no, and that's the thing is our job is not to diagnose. Our job is to understand. And also with things like ADHD, we're not always going to know. But also sometimes students don't know because something I know that Angela and I talked about at was it the fall faculty last year?
Yeah.
Which year was it? I don't remember.
In August,
It feels like 2 years ago. But the tests initially were designed for a select group of individuals, which means that some people may not get diagnosed, or the symptoms that we're looking for are symptoms that are traditionally associated with young boys, such as being overly active, impulsive, and just having like, I don't want to say out of control moments because that's the wrong word. What word am I looking for?
It's like past some kind of boundary, some sort of
Yeah.
normal expected boundary.
Like unexpectedly.
Yeah, or like inability to emotionally regulate yourself.
Right.
Because you haven't learned in the typical way that everyone else has about these coping skills. So the people who get diagnosed with ADHD at a younger age, they typically have had the advantage of having the accommodations, knowing what to do, and college is a new place. So sometimes just switching from high school to college or coming back, that can cause everything you've been doing, if you're undiagnosed, everything you've been doing to fall apart because now all of a sudden you have something new that you have to figure out. It's not part of your routine, your structure that you've built for yourself in coping. Just to share a little bit about myself, because I don't mind sharing about myself. So I was diagnosed with ADHD within the last 2 years. Fairly recent, right? Which means I've spent K through 12, first my bachelor's, both my master's programs, and most of my doctoral program undiagnosed, right? So like, that's a long time to go from like, wait, you've been successful, you passed school, you passed college, you passed your master's programs, you got a 4.0 in one of them. What happened? Like, wait, why are we all of a sudden struggling? And sometimes it just takes something new because with the onset of the pandemic, with the onset of a new doctoral program and trying to figure out a new way to think academically, all of a sudden there was a freeze in my brain of like, everything I'd been doing fell apart. Like I couldn't hide it anymore. I couldn't, like, so as a student, I was desperate and struggling. I was missing deadlines. I was doing half the assignment and then like freezing and procrastinating on it and trying to finish it in an hour before it was due. All of these like symptoms of ADHD were showing up, but I didn't know what to do with it. So I'm like, and as an educator, you would think like, I'd be like, oh, these are signs of ADHD because I teach young children who I sometimes refer to their parents and I'm like, ask them about these symptoms. I don't say I think it's ADHD because I can't diagnose their children, but I say, here are the symptoms I'm seeing. Are you seeing these at home? I recommend talking to your doctor about these things because they're the ones who can diagnose. But despite having the theoretical knowledge, it took me going to someone and them being like, hey, you ever think about getting tested for ADHD? So now I have the ADHD diagnosis, but I don't know what to do with it, right? So like as a student, I'm stuck. Like I'm like, okay. So I have the ADHD diagnosis. I know I have this thing. I know the symptoms of it, and I can like start identifying what symptoms I'm seeing. But now what do I do? Because when, especially in grad school, there's less freedom in like, oh, you're gonna go like draw your homework or something, right? Like in undergrad, we have a little bit more freedom to do a little bit more different things and ways of expressing it. And it took me having a professor in my program who was like, you like to draw? And I'm like, yeah, I love to draw. And she's like, drawing motivates you. And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, I want you to draw all your assignments for this year. And I was like, I'm sorry, we're in a doctoral program. That's not academic enough. She's like, no, but we're gonna draw it first, and then after you draw it, you're gonna write it. I was like, oh, you're meeting me where I am so I can get the information actually down and move it forward. But she and I talked, we had those conversations. Well, then I got my adjunct and I, had great groups of kids. And then I started noticing like attention is like, okay, like I'm teaching the way I thought you were supposed to teach. Like I'm going in the classroom with like these great, like I think they're great lessons, great assignments, and like sometimes attention is like not there. And I'm like, you're old enough to have attention though for like 50 minutes. Like what's going on? And I realized, oh, even adults don't have that attention span, right? I think that's where kind of you wanted to chime in a bit. Was that?
I'm wondering if when you got the diagnosis, was that a relief?
Oh yeah, because it
Explained a lot.
It explains so much.
So that's like a threshold. You were coping, and looking back, you could tell you were dealing with a lot of stuff.
Mhm.
But there was just enough change to push over that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Because that might be true for my students, just coming to college.
Yeah.
When I volunteer, I go, give presentations up at the high schools. That's an eye opener.
Mhm.
Then I think, oh, they're coming from there to here. No wonder that feels like a major
It's a
shift.
big shift.
Yeah.
And especially because there's the 3 types of ADHD, because we took away ADD, and now everything's being labeled as ADHD. And that's not to say ADD doesn't exist anymore. It's just a new form of labeling. So ADHD, you have the hyperactive type, you have the interactive type, and you have a combined type. Inattentive is typically the one that gets undiagnosed because it means you have more trouble paying attention. Your executive function, something in your, oh my gosh, I forgot the name of this, prefrontal cortex, is just not allowing you to spend enough attention on what you're doing in the moment. Hyperactive is, of course, the one we traditionally see, and then the combined is both. Despite having one or the other, though, you can show signs of the other one. It's just that that's your predominant one is what they're saying. So like if you're inattentive, you still might have the hyperactivity, but it's not as predominant. Combined means they see a 50-50 when they're diagnosing you. So that's kind of fun. Yeah.
I thought it all went into ADD, but that one went away and we have ADHD.
Yeah.
So it's always considered to have a hyperactive.
Mm-hmm. Right. Which is so interesting. Yeah. And I was actually reading an interesting article this morning on the research of ADHD and grades. And actually that's a big motivator because it feeds the dopamine when they see they get a good grade. And I was like, I never knew that. But then I thought back and I'm like, oh yeah, every time I got a good grade, I'd be like, my dopamine filled right up. So dopamine is a big part of this too, which, how do you describe dopamine? That's always a hard one for me to
That's
describe.
a happy drug living inside our brain.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very happy.
Yeah. So with ADHD, your brain is already depleted from, like, you have a harder time.
Oh, is it?
Like, so you have to like find ways to like get yourself there. So like, that's why stimulants work so well, is because if you're on ADHD medication, that's helping to fill that dopamine for you. Because if you don't have that dopamine, it's harder for you to interact, to go, to learn. And dopamine can get filled in a variety of different ways. Sometimes it's by being around others, sometimes it's by doing something you really enjoy. ADHD, we talk about hyperfixation a lot when we talk about ADHD. You're nodding like, what do you understand about it before I kind of just like.
So, I mean, just in students who come to our office, who we know their diagnosis, like, they will sit there and focus on one thing.
Yeah.
And it may not necessarily be the reason why they're in our office, but it's like, we spend 20 minutes on this one thing. And it takes a while to get to anything else.
Like
Yeah.
what? Like, what would they focus on?
Like, I had a student come in one day, I think we're trying to figure out if his accommodations were enough for him, because he struggled last semester. But he was so focused on a cell phone charger plugged into the wall by my desk. And he was asking, what kind of phone do you have? How often do you charge it? Why do you have this charger? And I was just like, okay.
Yeah.
But it went on for a while, and finally he was like, okay, my accommodations, like, he almost flipped a switch.
Yeah. Because you have to get like, it's almost like a dopamine fill.
Yeah.
So like sometimes it's something as simple as like, that is a very interesting plant. I wonder what kind of plant it is. And I'm very focused on the shape of the leaves, and I'm focused on the shades of green that I'm seeing, but also kind of looks a little white from the way that it's hitting it. It's really cool because like people with ADHD can get a lot of attention to detail, which is but also, what are we actually paying attention to? Because my brain is like, how would I paint that? And I'm trying really hard not to go into too much detail of how I would paint that plant right now. But because I've noticed it now, I guarantee half of my brain is only thinking about that. So one of the struggles then is taking students from like, okay, I know you're distracted by this thing, so how do we get your attention over here? And that's kind of like one of the bigger pieces of it, because I know like for myself, like I said, I'm drawing that plant in my head now. I'm half gone. So Jim, what do you think? Because otherwise I'll just stand here and talk the whole
This
time.
is where it, I don't know where to fit into the puzzle, because I don't want to bend the entire class out of shape so that I can keep people's attention. Because to a large extent, it feels like that's their business. They should figure out how to pay attention. But on the other hand, I want to reach everybody I can the best I can. So there's so much diversity in a given class. I don't want to make the whole class for a subset of who's there. So I guess the best way is just do a lot of variety and see what happens.
Yeah, and that is honestly the best way to do it, is just a lot of variety, doing group work, because then you can at least like, if one group is more focused on this one thing, and I guarantee you, I have students who will be like, when we do group work, and I'm like, we're gonna all do different topics, I have at least one student who goes, I want to do this topic. And I know, I'm like, your brain cannot let that topic go. You are stuck on it. So I'm like, yes, you may absolutely do that topic. Or I'll ask if no one volunteers, because I know a couple of them get stuck on it. I'll be like, anyone have a particular one that they want to call dibs on first? And there's at least one or two that I see the symptoms of ADHD in, but I don't know if they're diagnosed or not, nor can I diagnose them. But where I'm like, I know that if I let them pick, their attention will be so much stronger on that topic in this moment. Also, like, and I'm lucky because I get, do you get a lot of the same groups of students? Like same repeat students like across semesters?
Yeah.
Yeah, do you?
No.
No? So, I guess this is more for Calvin than for you.
Right.
But one thing I know, I figure out, it's like I have one group as a whole. Every time I tell them that they are fantastic at being partnered with anyone, they are like motivated. They're like, when I get them in groups, they're like, we're gonna be the best partners ever today. And I'm just kind of like, okay, like, and they they produce excellent work. Like, and I'm like, but that's the only thing I have to do to motivate them. But I also know from like trends of like which students I have is like, I have one student who just loves to use markers. Like, she loves the feel of markers and how they move across the paper. Even though we're adults, we still have some sensory things, especially when you have ADHD. Sensory things are going to be big. So on a sensory note, sorry, because now I'm side tangenting because that's what I do in my brain. Lights. Like, if I have a classroom during the day where I can leave the lights off and like the windows are nice, like I love, there's a room D202 and it has the best windows. And so if I can get a class in D202, I'm like, that's the one I want, because I know that sensory then will be like, the lights will be less harsh on the students with the fluorescence, which is so funny that we're in education school and yet fluorescents are everywhere, even though like it's shown that like it's like, it's cheaper. From a business perspective, I understand, but from a teaching perspective, I'm like, if we're going to actually be successful, maybe fluorescents are not the choice.
Drives me crazy.
Mm-hmm.
When they won't, as a group, they're hesitant that there's 20 people in the room to speak up about anything. I say, do you have an idea about this? So then when I break them into teams of 3 and say, everybody come up with ideas, and then get them back again, because they talk like crazy to each other when they're a group of 3. They just go nuts. I never do 5, because then they can use social loafing and just, I'll let the other 4 do whatever. And 2 is too much, but then 3. But I also give them a talk about how they're not fragile.
Mm-hmm.
We start that at the beginning of the semester. They're not fragile, they're not resilient, they're anti-fragile. They need challenges, they need to fail at stuff, they need to succeed at stuff and what happened. And once I talk about that with them, now I'm just like, today I'm like, okay, everybody grab a piece of paper, ready, draw a picture of the person next to you. And then they're like, I don't give them any time to get embarrassed or to worry about it. And I'm like, come on, let's go, it's gonna be fun. You guys are not fragile, let's go.
I cannot remember who said this right now, but plastic, resilient, and brilliant is something I heard like in a podcast I listened to a couple weeks ago. Sorry, I'm like, this is like, my hyperfixation is listening to podcasts right now. Like, I cannot get enough of them. Like, they're so good. Like, and I just uncovered like a higher ed one that I'm like, this is my new favorite. But plastic, brilliant, and resilient, which I think you could probably speak better about plasticity of the brain, because I'm not talking about plastic as in like plastic.
Yeah, because like when you go blind, our other 4 senses become stronger, right? Because our brain is rewiring itself for the new functions.
Yeah.
And the cool thing, or the interesting thing to me about plastic is not only can it rewire itself, it is going to rewire itself no matter what you're doing. So I asked the class if they know anybody who complains too much. And every semester, every class, every hand goes up. I know somebody who complains too much. I said, well, now they're putting that into their mind. They're training their brain to be a complaining brain. It's shaping itself into a complaining brain. I'm like, and the good news is we can pick what we put in our mind. Our minds are brilliant, our brains are stupid. They just do exactly what we tell them to do. So, it's what are we feeding in there? So I wish they didn't say plastic actually, because plastic is usually kind of hard.
Yeah.
But it's like plastic when it's still warm in a factory.
Well, it's like you're talking about plasticity of the mind.
Yeah,
So
you can shape it. So.
Yeah.
But it's going to get shaped like it or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which is so fun because I didn't realize that when you go to therapy, sometimes they evaluate your brain on how flexible or inflexible it is.
Oh, really?
Like, are you able to be a flexible thinker? Are you able to go with change? And typically I found out, I was talking to someone who is an ADHD therapist, and she's like, her ADHD, people who come to her typically are actually the most inflexible because they've taught themselves rigid rules of how to engage in society.
Yeah.
They don't let themselves break out of that box, because if they do, well then that's ADHD taking over. That's all the things I shouldn't be doing, even though there's something like they're hiding brilliant things behind that. So it's really ironic that the people who are impulsive and creative and doing all of these things are also the ones who have built such a rigidness for themselves. Because, oh, well, if I get distracted by making eye contact while I'm talking, I have to make sure to make eye contact. So all I'm thinking about in this conversation is just making eye contact. That's a rule That's the inflexibility right there. And I had another thought too, but I want to make sure you don't, you have thoughts before I.
Well, I used to have a normal life until I discovered artificial intelligence, and now we've gone the whole 15 minutes without me bringing it up. But this is what I do for a, this is what I do for in terms of variety. The other day in class, we got to manifest and latent content of dreams. You know, manifest is like what you can see right there, two dragons are playing volleyball on the beach or whatever. And then the latent content is what's the meaning of that dream, what's the meaning behind it. So I was trying to explain that. So I said, what are 3 things we can make a dream about? And they said, fish walking on land, fish walking on land, time traveling candy, and falling off a tower. So I went into ChatGPT and I said, make a dream out of these 3 things. And I went, made a dream. And I went, see that how it built a story of dream? That's the manifest content. And then I said to ChatGPT, now what's the latent content? That's all I had to say to do exactly what you're asking for. And then I gave all the meanings and symbols behind all that stuff. And I went, there you go, that's what that is. And then I told it to generate a painting. And it generated a painting of that dream with the fish walking and the time traveling candy going back into the past. And so I went right from that to the picture, and through that whole process, they were really, no matter where they were coming from, they were into it. And it's their dream, they just created it, so.
Jim and I work in very lucky fields where we have the opportunity to do a lot of variety. I don't know about other content areas, so I don't know how much variety can naturally occur. But for ADHD, if they don't understand something, they're going to get frustrated, especially with themselves, because we've learned like we have to give 110. Like that's kind of where the bar is set for us, is we have to give 110, because if we don't give 110, we're lazy, we're stupid, we're going back to learned helplessness, which sometimes on the flip, we're not giving 110 because we've learned that if we do things, we're just going to get negatively reinforced for it. An ADHDer has had more negative comments about them in their life than any other student, which means that by the time they hit our classroom, they've already been told like in negative ways, like, and had negative repercussions for not doing their homework, for not understanding something. So they already have this, I don't want to, what do you call that?
Because scripts, they've got scripts running in
Yes.
their mind. So, and this is, they got that because they were sort of disabled, what do you want to call it, without knowing it. And so something was going wrong and other people looked at them as being defective without knowing the words for it. So that'd be true of other other disorders.
Yeah, even diagnosed or diagnosed with this, because when you're diagnosed, it's like, oh, you have ADHD.
Yeah.
That's why you can't do it.
Yeah.
And it's not even like a positive thing then. It's like, oh, you have ADHD, you can't do it. But ADHD brains like challenge. They like new and they like novel, but they also like to understand things. So if I can't understand something, the new and novel thing isn't going to be exciting for me, because especially if it's building off of something already. So if you have a lesson you taught, you're like, I think everyone gets it, we're moving on to the next thing, plan this really cool new and novel thing, but the person didn't get it, they've already been set up for failure. Which is why assessment is so important for ADHD, well, for everyone really, but understanding really who gets it, who doesn't, formal, informal assessment, like, is still extremely important for ADHD. And something Jim and I talked about last semester in this session was about keeping the standards still, right? Like, we don't want to lower the standards, because if we're lowering the standards, well, they'll just lower the standard for me again. That comes back to learned helplessness. Oh, you already put that like there? Great, I'm gonna see if I can get it there. Now I'm gonna see if I can get it there. I'm gonna see if I can get it on the floor and I can just walk over you and your class. So assessment and standards are still very important for ADHD, because we still need that target. We need that challenge, we need that goal.
It sends a bad message too, I think.
What's that?
It sends a bad message, which is, you need to help you because you're not as powerful as the other people in class, or you're not as capable.
Yeah.
So it's both sides of it. I want to make room for you to do what you can coming from where you are. But on the other hand, I'm telling you the message that you're not as capable as these people. So we have to lower the bar, or whatever. So I just made it so they can all really succeed if they just do the work and apply themselves. That's another luxury we have being in psychology or education, because nobody's gonna die if they forget who Freud is.
Yeah.
But in chemistry, you know, if they're gonna become a nurse, they gotta get that right.
Right.
So it is luxurious. So I'm figuring I'm teaching them how to think. And then they can go from there. So now what do I do with the variety? But I never thought about that, having that particular being hard on yourself. That script that says there's something I keep failing and other people are telling me there's something wrong with me, and that gets into our mind. We just keep telling ourselves that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I tell them, you know, I totally believe in you. I know you can do this, and I'm not going to take any of your shit. So, so let's go.
Telling students I'm proud of you does wonders for the ADHD mind.
And
Like,
I am. I think that's important too. From Carl Rogers, I am actually genuinely proud of them. So I mean, they can tell that when I tell them I care about them and care about their education, they know I actually mean it. That I think that's key, because otherwise they're going to smell a rat.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they do smell a rat. Like they know, they can catch that. But even just noticing, like,
So how do they catch that?
so
Did you ever
when
try to
someone,
pull something off on a 4-year-old? They're way ahead of you.
Yeah.
You know, it's like parents will say, if we don't fight in front of the kids, they won't know there's a problem. Oh yeah, they know there's a problem.
like if I went like, oh, Calvin, I'm proud of you, I guess. Like you know, like I'm not being sincere. Or if I'm like, I'm proud of you, you're kind of like, yeah. But if I'm like, I'm proud of you for being here today, for showing up and being with us, because I am. Like, I'm actually really happy you're here. I'm a little bit proud that you're here because it makes me feel good too as well. But like, there's the difference of like knowing like when someone's like being like, because it's in the face, it's in the eyes, and because ADHD can be so observant, right? Because like the hyperfixation on the phone, like sometimes it's just like okay. But sometimes it also takes trust to build. So in education, we talk, and do you talk about Eric Erickson?
Yeah.
Eric Erickson talks like the first thing in life is like learning trust versus mistrust. Do you trust your caregivers? Do you not trust your caregivers? And that's something I believe doesn't go away as they go through school, especially because we're getting students from schools where that trust hasn't been always fulfilled, where I'll have students talk to me and like, there's one student who talks about Jim all the time to me. And she's like, huh?
This may not be good.
It's our friend.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's close.
But she's always like, he actually believes in me. And I'm like, yeah, of course he does. And she's like, no, you don't get it. He believes in, and I'm like, yeah, of course he does. Like, you're doing good. And she's like, no, she's like, you don't understand. You don't understand like how much like this means to me. Because when you have ADHD, especially if you're diagnosed and you've already got you can't do it because you have ADHD, having someone believe in you, and it also like, part of our brains want to, like, if we know that someone believes in us and we trust them, we're going to go the distance. Like, we're going to give you 150% of like our brains. Like, we're going to go home and not be able to do anything else other than think about your class because of how much you believe in us. And I've seen that where students will like come from like other classes where they're like, I can't stop thinking, this student in particular, about Jim's class because this was such a cool lesson, such a cool thing he did. Our friend, like, yeah.
8 squared?
No, other friend.
Oh.
I.
So many friends. Yes. Yeah.
No, not 8
Yeah,
squared.
because I'm proactively looking for their potential. And if you do that, you're going to see it.
Yeah.
So I just started looking for that. Then I started nurturing it because I'm a humanist psychologist, so we're like gardeners.
Yeah.
Find that and just give it what it needs, and we'll grow it. We'll grow their potential. Meanwhile, they've got all kinds of other stuff going on, like disorders. In which case, I just call Hunter and say, "Come on in." I'm not
He's lying. He's never called me.
They've got all kinds of stuff going on, and I'm like, I'm just going to keep going for that potential. I'm just going to keep.
Yeah.
So I wonder how you do it in Cass. How do you balance between giving them stuff that helps them grow, but not giving them the message that there's something wrong with you?
So in CAS, a lot of times because we do intakes with students now, it's like the first meeting we're going to talk about what's difficult for you, maybe what's been negative, disability, but then every meeting after that, we try not to say disability or how can you be successful? what worked for you previously, and try to find ways for them is to connect with their faculty, use other services, and try to figure out what sparks that.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a connection with the person, and really that's been all they needed, just finding that person for them.
Yeah.
Back to mention our CAS, we get a notification that a student has been approved. And what I do is I go through the syllabus and I spend more time on the CAS portion, so I can reach the general. Okay. And then I get notification that a student has been approved, so I make the adjustment. I don't follow up with them. The adjustment's been made. They gotta know because now they got an extra time for the exam. So I kind of leave it as that for the rest of the semester. I don't want to bring attention to it, but I send a student email to please know I made the adjustment, such and such. But I don't bring up ever again in the semester. Is that okay?
Yeah, for some of our students, that's fine. Some students need more one-on-one prompting support, and that's when they visit our office a lot more.
But how would I know if that's a student that I should say something after that?
Well, we tell all the students, like, they need to introduce themselves the first day, second day of class to their faculty and just be like, hey, I'm connected to CAS. If there's anything they need to be successful.
I get probably 5%.
Yeah. So I know there's a handful of students who will do it, but we have a lot of students who are just like, I don't want to bring attention to it.
So I'm asking, am I okay not bring, okay.
You're doing good.
Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I do the same thing. I go over the CAS in the first day and the second day in case someone has the class after. And what I do is I talk about CAS and I'm like, if you have accommodations, if you're not comfortable talking to me face to face about it, email me to make sure that I got your accommodations, because what happens if, yes, you submitted to CAS, but say like, I'm not trying to say like you don't do your job, but like what happens if like that was an email that was missed, or what if it's an email that somehow out of the blue went to spam or something? Like I doubt it would, but just to be on the safe side, just so that way I can fulfill your accommodation, make sure that somehow you communicate with me about it. Blackboard messaging, email, in person, just to make sure I have it. So there's the accountability on them then, and usually that's what works for me, is they'll be like, oh, if I want to use the accommodation, I need to follow up and reinforce it. I've only had one student who didn't, and I didn't get the CAS email actually, which was the one time where it didn't work. This was like spring last year. But she walked up to me and she's like, so is my test in the CAS center? And I'm like, nope. Did you make an appointment with CAS? And she's like, well, I figured the test was today, so I just go over there and take it. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I know being like, I could guess what it was. I'm guessing it was ADHD, but I can't label anything, like I said, but my guess is that. And I'm like, I know sometimes making appointments is hard to remember to do, and following up on those appointments sometimes is hard to do. But if you want to use it, you do have to make an effort towards it. So that's one of the things. Do you have anything else to add on that? Of how you?
I find that calendar management is bad for lots of people, whether they have ADHD or not, and procrastination and is, I've spent my whole academic career waiting till the last minute to do things so that I've been panicked and get full of energy, because now I can do it. So I asked them, how many of you did that? It's like 3/4 of the class. So I say, okay, so if you're late on assignment, you're going to get half points up to 24 hours, and then you're getting no points. So how could you deal with that? If you're like me and you put things to the last minute, usually within a 5-minute conversation or less, they figured out the way to deal with that is start earlier.
Yeah.
And I go, but I have ADHD. Start earlier.
I laugh when they tell me that.
I have a parent emailing me saying, but my son needs this special stuff, so he needs to be late on his assignments. I'm saying he can start earlier. You are not fragile.
Yeah, I do. I will say my student, I had a student come up to me and she's like, so I have ADHD and I didn't do the assignment. I'm like, and I have ADHD and I teach the class every day. Like, what's your point? Like, I was a little bit harsh about it there. But like, it was what she needed. Cause she was kind of like, oh, so I'm not gonna be able to pull this out from under you. And I'm like, no, you can't. Because you're telling me after, and my syllabus policy says you have to talk to me before the assignment is due, and you have to propose a new date within 2 weeks of when the assignment is due. Like, I'm very specific on that. Like, and I talk about it all the time in class. Like, I do not let it go. Because I know life comes up. I know sometimes things happen. People get sick. Accidents happen. So it's one of those things where, like, you've been told the policy enough. Like, but also, like, yeah, with ADHD, you have to provide your own structure. And if it's just knowing that, like, if you sit down day one and all you do is watch TikToks for an hour, but then day two you sit down and do it again and you write it all in that setting, which is a bad habit that I used to have because I had to plan in a TikTok hour for writing. It's a weird thing to say where it's like, I have to plan an hour where I'm going to write, but I'm not really writing. My brain is doing something different. But that helped me for a while where it's like, okay, I know I'm going to plan to do something that isn't, but then I'm going to keep, like, these are the days that I have to do it, which means that day two, when I go back to write it, I'm successful. I'm writing it down. I'm doing it. Something I embed into my classes, especially my introduction class. So I have the benefit of some introduction classes. Do you have? So in my introduction classes, a lot of the times what I'll do is I try not to lecture as much in those because I try to do things that are study tips. So I'll do a lot of like different types of sheets and making posters and making their own Excel notes and just varying it to give them different ways in which we can study. And also use the one that my professor gave me, which is draw it all. Like, draw out our entire lecture from today. And just giving them different ways so that they can take it with them. Whether or not they use it is a different thing. I hope some of them use it. But just in setting up a way to study. Because they haven't always been taught how to study. It's just an expectation of, well, how do you study? Like, do I read the book over and over again? Do I read my notes over and over again? Do I write things down? Like, what do I do with it? And for some people, they need, like me, to draw it out. Some people need to have like a chart where they like compare and contrast things. Some people need to compare it to books or movies, which is really fun if you have the opportunity to do that, by the way. I get to teach about parenting. So I have an assignment where they have to watch a TV show or a movie and write about the different types of parenting they see in it. But again, that's a benefit of my class.
Yeah, nothing, every semester, the same subjects cause the most discussion.
Yeah.
And that's drugs, dreams, psychopaths, and spanking. Those are the 4 topics that will just occupy an entire class without any question.
I have so many questions. I got on them. What's up?
Correctional discipline.
Yes.
Yeah, like corporal punch.
Okay.
The effect of spanking on psychopaths, is that what you were going for?
Was there? She is now.
I have no idea. But what I do is I use, because that's a disorder, I don't do disorders.
Okay, no, you can't just leave it there.
Dr. Howard brings
Talk about-
do disorders, I don't do disorders. So what I do is use really firm boundaries, like everything's due on Tuesday, deal with it. Everything's due on Tuesday, and then what I do is I've got extra points built into the semester. So when they miss something, there's plenty of room for them they could miss like 3 assignments and they're doing just fine. And then I also challenge them to break the all-time record for points because the scale goes to 400. And, Kimberly Huzinga got 455 out of 400. And then the next semester, her sister broke it with 456. I'm not exaggerating, she broke it by 1 point. And then we're on COVID and we're in Zoom. And Kimberly's there and then Ashley leans her head in. Then the parents walk back and behind and go, oh, time out, parents. What have you been doing with these people? They're the most fantastic students. And they're both homeschooled. That's why I was blaming on the parents. Tell me, what are you doing? They're fantastic. So I challenge them and say, who's going to beat that? And then I also have a gold-plated $100 bill that they get at the end of the semester for whoever has the most points in any of my classes.
I'm about to take one of your classes. I love the bill.
Take my classes.
Competitiveness is also a trait of ADHD, by the way.
Who does?
Competitiveness.
Oh,
It can be
it's a big
traded.
deal? Oh.
Yeah, because
I
we
must not
have to
have
get
it.
so when you did the Kahoot the first time, whenever I took one of your CTE classes, I was sitting back there and I kept getting it. I'm like, yes, I'm going to keep getting like first. And I did win. So.
I don't know if you won because I'm more competitive than you.
I don't know. I've got the advantage of having technology in my whole life. So Just saying. Something else too, before we get too sidetracked in this time, is some things that I do in my big assignment. So online classes, we have things where we have to write out where it's like, you're doing this thing. But for big assignments for all of my classes, I try to do an alternative to just like, so let's say it's a paper. I try to do something alternative that still meets the same requirements. And then I always put, if you have a different idea for how you want to meet the rubric, meet the requirements of the assignment, talk with me. And if you propose something that fits it, you can do it. And I've actually had several people take me up on that. Someone made a brochure for one of my classes instead of a research paper. And it was actually better than most of it. But we're not going to talk about that.
Yeah, I had a woman who wrote a comic book for each of the exams.
Yeah.
And there was one exam every week, and it was different personality theorists.
Yeah.
And each one, she just made a different comic book and drew it. And some were better than others. Now, it was easy to grade them, actually.
Yeah.
Because I could tell how much she was comprehending it.
Yeah.
But so most of them were A's, but she was loving it. She thought that was the best thing. And she seemed to really be getting the material from it. So
Yeah.
I wanted to say, okay, that's what we're all doing for the whole class, but
Yeah.
not everybody learns the same way.
I had someone do that for when we had to write a paper about a theorist, and someone was like, can I do a cartoon? Like, you still have to do citations, but in the text bubbles, there were citations from where they
cool.
found, and they still had a reference page. That was my thing, is you still have to have citations and a reference page. Like, those are requirements of the assignment. They're like, I'll put it in this, like, their dialogue, because like, it'll be as if they're talking to the theorist. And I'm like, great, perfect. So teaching how to study is a big thing, because we don't always get that in general, but also for ADHD, we sometimes don't know that other methods exist, and we're sitting there like trying to cram it all in. Like, we're reading the book over and over, reading our notes over and over, listening to the videos, but like nothing's sinking in. So teaching ways to study that aren't like traditional, like such as making posters, making graphs, drawing it, having alternatives for assignments, provided it still meets the assignment, right? Like, there are some times where, like, if you're drawing blood from like as a nursing student, I don't know how you create an alternative assignment for that. Like, that's kind of important for you to learn how to do.
Oh, I thought you meant that metaphorically. If
Oh,
you're
no.
drawing blood, and I thought, wow, where's this going?
Like, I'm just saying, like, if a
Actually
nurse
drawing
did an
blood.
alternative assignment and passed, and then went to draw my blood, I'd be like, how are you going to draw my blood? Like, just saying. I'd be very nervous.
Some kind of metaphor that drawing blood was.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with the calendar then for people with ADHD? How do you make it?
Oh,
How do you
to
design things so it works out for them?
I stick to the same, like, I think I do it based on my grade, to be honest, where like I think I can grade it. That sounds bad, but they still get it in when they need to. But like I said, I have the 2 week, like, before the assignment starts, if you know, like, you have to, even if it's like 2 minutes before the assignment's due, I need that email saying you're going to have it within the 2 weeks with a date. If they don't have a date with it, I deny it.
And then on beginning of every class I go, the first thing I do is go to Blackboard and go to the calendar and say, look at this, so here's what we have, here's what's due, here's what's coming up. And then we play Wordle.
Yeah, I don't use my syllabus calendar, but I have a calendar I build on Blackboard every year, where it's like, it doesn't like go point by point of what we're learning that week, but it's like week 1, week 2 with the dates. And then it's like, here's the readings that are due that day, and here's the assignments that are due that day.
Wow.
So we go over that
That's so structured.
well, that's
fantastic.
I actually did it for the first time because I was
admiring
procrastinating on my own
something that I'm
homework.
never gonna be able to do again.
That was a procrastination thing I started doing. But then I loved it, and it worked really well for the students, so I kept doing it. Sometimes when you're procrastinating yourself and working on something, you find that it works better. Things that actually help ADHD, though, that have been not just like medication or diagnosis, but something that helps everyone is mindfulness, which sounds really weird because you're like, wait, the brains are so busy and active. Mindfulness? Like, how does that? But mindfulness is one of the biggest things to helping, like, slow yourself down, remember things better. Because let's be real, like, my husband isn't the one in the house who's asking where things are. I know that's an old joke of gender, but I'm the one going like, honey, where are my keys? Like, where's my venture card? Glasses. I can't tell you how many times he has to be like, you left your glasses on the coffee table. like,
On your head.
or on my head, or my phone in my hand. But I'm not the one answering where things are in our house, unless I decide I get really excited and I'm like, oh, I have a new vision for the kitchen. And then he comes home and he's like, oh. But that aside, so mindfulness is a big thing. Play and movement. So
Do you do a mindfulness exercise at the beginning of class?
for some classes I do, and sometimes I forget. Just being honest, sometimes I forget. But I try to do something mindfulness at the beginning, which is, I get the lucky thing though of we're doing early childhood. So I teach ones that they can use in their classrooms in the future.
So you have a 5 o'clock right over there.
You're ditching me for?
Yes, I'm ditching you for students, customers. I've got customers awaiting.
I'm so disappointed in you. But
Sorry, everybody.
Jim, can you share the homeschool, so we're doing a homeschool event in June, and we would love to feature the successful homeschool students.
Oh, yeah, should I email them and say they were from?
If they're interested.
They were from COVID lockdown, how long was that? 3 years?
Oh, if they're not still here.
No, they'll be at university somewhere,
Oh, that's better.
kicking ass at some university.
Yeah,
Should I try and contact them?
if you can, that would be
Okay.
great. Yeah.
well, Jim's gonna miss on the best part, play.
No.
But finding ways to make learning playful, like gamifying things. Like I'm really excited for tomorrow's class because we're doing like, they have to make a policy around like a case where like a school outbreak happens. And it's like Ebola, which like, I don't know why Ebola would break out in a classroom, but like, that's what we're doing. And they all have different roles. So we're gamifying it of like, someone's a principal, someone's a teacher, someone's a school board member, someone's a parent or an aunt or something. And they all have and I had AI write, Jim's missing this. I had AI write the descriptions of all the people for me. So you also don't have to put that much time into it anymore. You don't have to sit and go, okay, what kind of person do I, now you can put into AI, I'm doing this in my classroom. You give me descriptions of people that they play. And I know for the group that I have tomorrow, that's gonna work really well for them. But also figuring out your group, because like I had one group who like I tried fishbowl with, which is something Gabe taught me, and that did not go well. And then I had another group where I'm like, I think they could do fishbowl. Have you seen fishbowl before? So you put like 2 chairs in the middle of the room, and you have a prompt, which is like a reading or something. So I did readings for both of these. And it was like a really difficult reading where we did like a worksheet on it beforehand where it's like, they had a worksheet they had to fill out on it about the main themes and topics. So like a study guide basically. And then they came with their study guides and the text, the article, and they had 2 volunteers start, and they sat in the chair and they had to talk to each other about the article. And so they could ask each other questions, they could read an excerpt saying like, I read this, I couldn't really understand it. And everyone else in the class had to listen. And first class I did it with, it did not work. Second class I did it with, they loved it. There was only like one student who was like hesitant, but she like was like, I'm gonna go in for just a minute. And then like after a minute, she looked around and someone was like, I got you, get out. But gamifying things, chances to talk things out, different ways of studying, mindfulness, play, what else was there? I can't think of anything else. Like those are my big.
That could be a lot of pressure, because you directly, that's like fishbowl.
Yeah, it is a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
But that's why I figured out with the first class, I'm like, oh, that didn't work. I was never going to do it again. I'm going to be honest. I thought I was never going to do that again until that class where I was looking at them and I'm like, I think. Because also an issue I had in that particular class was they all loved to talk.
The one that did well.
It went well.
Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah.
So like I'd ask a question to the group and I'd have 6 voices come at me and I'm
Right,
like,
right.
I cannot understand all of this.
That's right.
But because they were such a chatty group and they loved to talk, it worked very well. But I thought I was never going to do that activity again. Like I was like, that was a dud.
Yeah.
It was like Gabe
And
Guzman.
so you probably won't do that at the beginning of the semester.
No,
Right,
no.
I gotta be later on.
Yeah, so like I said, we did a lot before that. We had the article, we read the article, we did a worksheet on it, and then we had discussion, like they had to talk about like the answers they got on their study sheet, and then we did the fishbowl. So like it was like 3 classes over a difficult reading. So they were very well prepared for it. But it was nice because then I found out a bunch of questions that they weren't willing to ask me. So they'd ask each other in the fishbowl.
Nice.
And I was like, you could have just task, like, guys. But yeah, they had a lot of fun with it. And at the end, I would tap someone out, wrap up the conversation with some things I noticed, some things that I was like, this is kind of like a little bit of like where you guys were trying to get at, but you didn't quite get it. Like I'd wrap up the conversation, sit in the fishbowl with someone. So like that's how I did it. But it was also challenging for them because they all like to talk. So they'd be waiting to tap someone out. They're like, I don't want to interrupt, but I want to tap that person out so I can talk. But their attention was on the conversation because they couldn't just come in and like change the conversation. Like the rule was you had to talk about what was being talked about unless the conversation had died down and the people in the middle were staring at each other. And then you could come in and ask a question. But you had to be in the conversation that was happening. So their attention was laser focused. They were like, and I saw people were taking notes on the sidelines too. And I was like, this worked really well for you guys. But it was challenging for them. It was novel and challenging, and they had to practice a lot of listening that day. Yeah. But those are mindfulness is a big one. But you can't force people to do mindfulness. That's kind of that's the hard thing about that one is you can't force anyone to do it because it can be uncomfortable for people. Because I know the first time I did mindfulness, I was like, what's happening? And then at the end, I was like, oh, okay, like now I get it. Physical activity, I'm kind of sad she left because like physical is fine. So if you guys want to leave, I won't be offended. But physical activity is a big one too. If you can do anything with movement in your class, like even just getting up to switch groups is a good like reset, good movement. I know Juan's always outside with his classes. Right. But physical movement's great. Untraditional seating can be distracting at first for some other students because they're kind of like, what are you doing? But I know that if I sit in a chair too long, like if I attend like a fall faculty meeting, about like a half an hour in, I'm just sitting there like, I want to get up. I cannot sit in this chair anymore. So I have some students who will sit on the floor or who will sit on the desks.
Now, they'll just do it on their own, or you just kind of announce that they can do that?
I tell them that they can do it first and second classes. I'm like, if you ever feel like you need to move around or you need to like.
Or sit on the floor. You mentioned that so they can change. Okay.
Yeah. But also moving around like doesn't bother me in the back. I know for some students the first time someone else does it, it bothers them. But one of the things is like movement. Like if you can't sit, like it prevents you from leaving the classroom. So to go back to my student leaving the classroom after we had the conversation about like, I'm like, hey, you leave the classroom like for a long period of time. And sometimes you do it multiple times a day. And he's like, yeah, it's just really hard. I have ADHD, so sometimes like sitting for a long period of time, like he's like, sometimes it's like 5 minutes, sometimes it's 10 minutes, but like some days it's harder to focus. And I'm like, okay, so here's the deal. You can leave once during class because it was multiple times. I'm like, you have to sit in the back though. And you can get up and like stand by the wall or you can pace a little bit in the back, but you have to sit in the back. And so he and his bestie went and sat in the back, and whenever like he stopped leaving entirely after that conversation. Like, but he would go and stand at the back wall, or he'd pace with his notebook and write things down, or he'd have his computer and he'd be typing the notes and looking at the screen, and like it worked for him. So but you don't always get that moment of figuring out what works. But I know for me, like sitting on a harder surface grounds me, and my focus is gonna be laser on you. Like, but if I sit like in that chair for like half an hour, I'm surprised you guys are still sitting in the chairs, to be honest. Like that's how my brain's working. Is like how. So that's another thing too. Is like with ADHD, sometimes I'm sitting there like, how are you guys sitting this long? Like I'm looking around at the faculty workshops, and I'm like, how? What do you? How? Because my brain it's gone. But I do things to ground me. Like I do practice mindfulness in the middle because I know those things now though. So like I'll stop during the middle of the faculty meeting and I'll just like look down and like just like practice some breathing techniques, and then I'll be centered and ready to engage again. Or I'll draw something while I'm listening because that will help ground me as well. And I'll have that stimulation. So like fidgets and stuff are great. And I have the tinkering lab, which I'm sure Allie told you a little bit about, right? We have the benefit of the tinkering lab. So on each of my tables, I already have sensory materials out. So they can come in and we have like things where they'll like sit and like make little signs with it. But I also know those students, like if I ask them what I talked about, they know. They'll know better than the people who are taking notes. The people who take notes are like, let me see what you said, and the people doing the thing are like, oh, you said this. So it's all down to the individual. Like, that's kind of also the thing, is like figuring out what works. And that's hard. Not gonna lie. I just get lucky because I work in education and we talk about this all the time, so I can identify it. But yeah. We went completely off script, by the way, today, guys. Like, that was like all improv.
No, it's good.
Yeah.
Good.
Jim and I had a PowerPoint.
I saw it.
We saw, yeah.
There were slides.
I was going to ask you, how can I identify someone with ADHD? And then you guys kind of gave me the information.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's my biggest thing, how do I identify it?
Yeah. And you
I don't have students who come up and tell me.
Yeah.
You know, so then now I can look for it. I mean, I see some similarities.
Yeah.
You know, but it's not enough where I can say, okay, let me have a conversation with the person.
Yeah.
I can probably get through it or whatever.
Yeah.
So now I need to be more cognizant and not try to get through it. So, okay, this is maybe the person I need to have a conversation with.
Yeah.
You know.
And like I said, our brains love challenge. So like, if you like say something positive and then be like, hey, what do you think? Like, ask it like, I'm trying to think how to like, not ask it like what happened, but like, hey, what did you think about this? Like, even though you know that that person's struggling with that, like, because you can see in the assessments, like, what do you think about this? And then sometimes they're like, did you just not read it? But then they'll start talking about it,
Right.
and then like you can have a bigger conversation about like what they're not getting. But starting with the positive like hooks them. It's like little candy for us. That's if they trust you. If they don't trust you, then it's going to be like.
You mentioned case. I got some students. I'm big on if you ask me a question that was in the syllabus. You know, kind of like, okay, they need you to read the syllabus. So I have a little patience for that. Now, that's probably not good. So for someone with ADHD, maybe they did read it. And they didn't understand. I need to step back. Because typically, if you ask me a question that was on page 6, I'm probably gonna say, oh, look on page 6. Then you tell me what you know.
Yeah.
And I probably shouldn't be that hard.
It depends on your expectations too, and if you line them out. Because if you say this is where the bar is,
Well, I keep it high.
that's where they're going to meet you. So if you say like I'm going to talk about things in page numbers, they're going to work
Okay.
to remember that.
Okay.
But if you don't give them that, you have to give them that specific phrasing though. Of like when we're talking about something like this, I'm going to ask you about like page numbers. Because sometimes like one of the things that I know I struggle with is I'm like it was in the book. I know it was in the book, and I could tell you all about it.
Right.
But you asked me what chapter it was in, and I'm like, it was in the book.
Right.
But I read it.
Right.
I know it. But it was in the book. So that's another thing too, is like, where are our strengths in remembering things? But if you say like, this is the part you need to know, if you're very explicit about it.
I try to keep the bar high.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, yeah.
So,
And that's where I keep the bar too. Like professionalism is big in my classroom. Like cell phones I know are back and forth between people, but I'm like, you're going into early childhood, you won't have a cell phone on you in the classroom. Like you're gonna be with the kids. So the bar for cell phones, high. You're not on your cell phone.
Right.
But like when it comes to learning content, like I want to see you apply it. Like that bar of application for me is high. If you forget the theorist's name, that bar is a little bit lower. But if you forget the application of it, that's where my bar is, and that's where I expect you to be. And I'm very clear about that with them. I'm like, this is a hands-on, early childhood's hands-on. You need to know how to apply it. So we keep the bar up there. And I also give them secrets too, but also like I work in education. So I'm like, oh, like, so assessment, right? It's important. And I'm like, yeah, assessment. And I'm like, so how'd you guys feel about the activity day? Oh, we loved it. That was an assessment on you guys. Assessment doesn't have to be boring. Sorry, I love assessment. I think it's really fun. Like, huh? I don't have the time or the bandwidth.
You can continue, I just want to make sure that this is.
Yeah, I think she was recording it. I don't know.
was? Okay.
But we forgot about the screen completely, so you can shut it all down.
Yeah, we don't want that.
Yeah.
She was.
But I'm glad you found some things. Like,